Have you ever wondered why some people are drawn to your light, yet secretly seem to resent you for it? It's almost as if your kindness exposes something they've tried to keep hidden. In this video, we'll explore the hidden psychology Carl Jung uncovered about why empaths like the INFJ become mirrors to the parts of others they cannot face, and why that beautiful light you carry so often awakens both admiration and envy. Carl Jung often spoke about the profound duality that exists within human nature, the coexistence of light and shadow within the psyche. For Jung, every person carries both aspects, the light being the part of the self we are conscious of and proud to express, and the shadow representing the parts of ourselves we suppress, deny, or fear. When applied to INFJs, who are deeply empathic, intuitive, and spiritually attuned individuals, Jung's insights reveal a haunting truth. The very light that makes INFJs magnetic often also makes them targets of unconscious resentment. To understand why INFJs and other empaths attract people who secretly resent their light, one must first understand what Jung meant by the shadow. The shadow, in Jung's view, is not evil in itself. It is simply everything within us that we refuse to acknowledge. It includes repressed desires, wounds, insecurities, and fears. When people encounter someone whose presence illuminates these repressed aspects, it can provoke discomfort or even hostility. The INFJ's light does precisely that. Their empathy, depth, and calm understanding act like a mirror, reflecting back to others the parts of themselves they try hardest to avoid. INFJs have a rare emotional intelligence that allows them to see behind masks. They can perceive hidden motives, emotional wounds, and insecurities without needing words. To many, this feels like an emotional unveiling. Jung would say that the INFJ's presence activates the projection mechanism. When people are not in touch with their own light, they tend to project their shadow onto others. An INFJ becomes an easy target for such projections because their energy carries both purity and depth, the very qualities that unhealed individuals unconsciously envy or distrust. Jung believed that what we reject in ourselves, we often demonize in others. So when someone encounters the INFJ's inner light, an aura of calm strength, empathy, and quiet wisdom, it unconsciously reminds them of their own potential for goodness, integrity, and spiritual sensitivity that they have neglected. This creates a psychic dissonance. They admire the INFJ, yet feel threatened by the mirror the INFJ holds up to their soul. Jung might describe this as the shadow's rebellion against the light. It's not that these people consciously decide to resent INFJs. It happens beneath awareness, in the depths of the unconscious. The INFJ's compassion, their ability to understand pain without judgment, can make others feel both seen and vulnerable. Jung suggested that empathy like this penetrates the ego's defenses. For many, this exposure feels intolerable. They sense that the INFJ can see who they truly are beneath the persona they carefully maintain. Rather than feeling safe in that light, they feel stripped bare, defenseless, and small. In response, the ego fights back through subtle forms of resentment, sarcasm, criticism, withdrawal, or covert hostility. The very light that could heal them becomes the light they try to dim. Another aspect of Jungian insight lies in the INFJ's relationship with their own shadow. Because INFJs are highly self-aware and introspective, they spend much of their lives confronting their own darkness, examining their motives, fears, and flaws. This ongoing dialogue with their shadow gives them a rare authenticity and depth. People who have not done similar inner work may feel unconsciously inferior in their presence. Jung said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. The INFJ's energy tends to catalyze transformation in others, but not everyone is ready for that alchemical reaction. Some resist it, fearing what it would require them to face within themselves. INFJs embody a kind of spiritual radiance that often contrasts sharply with the ego-driven world around them. Jung's concept of individuation, the process of integrating one's shadow and realizing the true self, describes the journey the INFJ is often already walking. Because they strive to live authentically, Guided by intuition rather than social approval, they embody qualities like depth, kindness, and moral conviction that others secretly long for, but have not cultivated. When people who are still ruled by ego encounter such authenticity, they feel exposed. Jung wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Resenting an INFJ is often easier than acknowledging the inner work they themselves have neglected. Jung also emphasized that light and shadow must coexist. One cannot exist without the other. The INFJ's light is not merely sweetness or gentleness. It is forged in struggle. Their empathy often comes from suffering, their wisdom from wounds. Yet to those who see only the outcome, the calm, insightful exterior, it may look effortless, almost unfair. This misunderstanding can further breed resentment. People project onto the INFJ an unrealistic purity or perfection, and when they feel they cannot measure up, they unconsciously try to bring the INFJ down to their level. Also, Jungian psychology would suggest that many who resent INFJs are actually drawn to them because their unconscious seeks healing. The soul recognizes in the INFJ what it needs to become whole. The initial attraction is often intense. People feel magnetized by the INFJ's warmth, presence, and understanding. But once that light begins to touch their own hidden wounds, the attraction turns to tension. Jung called this phenomenon enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposite. Admiration becomes envy. Love turns to resentment. The one they sought for comfort becomes the one they unconsciously attack. For the INFJ, this dynamic can be deeply painful. They often cannot understand why people they have helped or supported later withdraw, criticize, or betray them. Jung would say that the INFJ must learn to recognize when their light is triggering someone's shadow, and to understand that it's not their fault. The resentment others feel is a reflection of their own inner conflict, not a commentary on the INFJ's worth. This awareness allows INFJs to maintain compassion without absorbing others' projections. At a deeper level, Jung's teachings reveal that the INFJ's role is archetypal. They often embody the wounded healer or sage archetype, figures who walk between light and darkness, healing others by simply existing as a mirror of truth. But such archetypes always provoke resistance. Just as light makes shadows more visible, the INFJ's presence forces others to confront what they hide. In a world that prefers comfort over growth, this can make the INFJ both revered and resented. The irony is that those who resent the INFJ's light are often those who need it most. Jung believed that healing begins when we make the unconscious conscious, when we face the parts of ourselves we have disowned. The INFJ's empathy gently guides others toward that realization, even if it's met with rejection. Over time, some of those very people who once resented the INFJ may later come to recognize how deeply they were influenced by them, how the light they resisted was the same light that awakened something within them. Jung would also argue that one of the deepest reasons INFJs attract those who secretly resent their light lies in their profound alignment with the unconscious collective, the animum mundi, or world soul. INFJs tap into emotional and spiritual undercurrents that most people cannot articulate. Their intuitive insight allows them to speak truths others only sense, but cannot name. Jung believed that such individuals act as bridges between the conscious and unconscious realms of society. Yet, in doing so, they often disrupt the collective comfort of denial. Their very awareness unsettles those who would rather not see beyond the surface. To those who live in avoidance, the INFJ's clarity feels invasive, almost threatening, because it reveals what they are running from within themselves. People unconsciously sense that INFJs perceive more than they show. Jung described this as the presence of a numinous quality, an almost sacred energy that evokes both awe and fear. The INFJ's empathy doesn't just comfort, it penetrates. It makes people feel known, and to be fully known, especially by someone who sees beneath the mask, is a terrifying experience for egos built on illusion. Jung warned that when the ego feels cornered by truth, it will often lash out rather than evolve. This is why individuals who initially idolize INFJs may suddenly become cold or distant once that deep intuitive gaze touches a part of them they're not ready to confront. Another subtle reason behind this attraction, resentment dynamic, is the INFJ's natural inner harmony. Jung said that those who begin to integrate their shadow exude a sense of psychic balance that others instinctively recognize. The INFJ's balance between intellect and intuition, reason and empathy, light and dark, creates a quiet power that others crave but cannot easily replicate. To people still fragmented within, the INFJ's wholeness is a silent reminder of their own disunity. This comparison breeds envy, not because the INFJ boasts of their qualities, but precisely because they don't need to. Their serenity exposes the inner chaos of those still ruled by unresolved conflicts. Jung also spoke of psychic contagion, the way emotional energies transfer unconsciously between people. INFJs, being open empaths, often absorb the energy of others. But this energetic sensitivity also makes others feel as though the INFJ's presence magnifies their emotions. When someone filled with guilt, insecurity, or repressed anger spends time near an INFJ, those feelings intensify, not because the INFJ creates them, but because their field of awareness amplifies what already exists. The unhealed individual, unable to face this internal surge, unconsciously blames the INFJ for making them feel that way. Thus begins a cycle of projection where resentment takes root. Jung might describe this as a clash between archetypes. The INFJ often embodies the wise one, healer, or seer, while those drawn to them unconsciously take the role of the wounded child, or shadow self. These dynamics are not random. They're archetypal forces playing out through human relationships. The light in the INFJ awakens the dormant potential for healing in others, but the ego resists surrender. Healing requires humility, and humility threatens pride. So rather than embracing the INFJ's light as a guide, many feel an instinctive urge to rebel against it, to prove that they do not need it. The resentment is, in truth, a defense mechanism of the ego trying to maintain its illusions of control. The INFJ's moral compass also plays a significant role in this dynamic. Jung observed that those who follow the path of individuation, the journey toward authentic selfhood, become increasingly guided by an inner moral sense rather than societal validation. INFJs naturally embody this. They follow conviction over popularity, meaning over approval. This quiet defiance of conformity often stirs hidden jealousy in others who still depend on external validation. People may not admit it, but witnessing someone live authentically while they themselves conform to fear or social pressure creates deep inner tension. They begin to rationalize their resentment by labeling the INFJ as self-righteous or too intense, when, in reality, they're projecting their own suppressed longing for authenticity. Jung would also highlight the paradox of the INFJ's humility. Because INFJs do not flaunt their gifts, people assume their light should be easily accessible, even exploitable. Jung spoke of how others often feed off psychic energy from those who embody a strong connection to the self. INFJs, being natural givers, unknowingly allow this until they feel drained. The irony is that the same people who draw from their emotional strength often turn resentful once the INFJ sets boundaries. The ego, addicted to the INFJ's light, feels deprived when it is withdrawn. Resentment then becomes a way to reclaim power, an unconscious protest against the INFJ's refusal to continue serving as an emotional crutch. Jung would remind us that every empath, especially the INFJ, walks a fine line between savior and mirror. Their instinct to help and heal can activate what Jung called the savior complex, where they unconsciously attract those who need rescuing. But the moment the INFJ stops rescuing and starts reflecting truth, the relationship shifts. Those who sought comfort begin to see that the INFJ isn't here to save them, but to awaken them. Awakening feels like betrayal to those who only wanted soothing. Thus, admiration becomes resentment, not because the INFJ failed them, but because they held up a mirror instead of offering escape. There's also a mystical dimension to this. Jung often wrote about the lightbearers, individuals who carry an inner luminosity that triggers collective, unconscious reactions. The INFJ's empathy and insight act as this light in human form. They are, in essence, modern-day embodiments of what Jung called the self-archetype, symbols of wholeness, balance, and transcendence. Yet history shows that humanity often persecutes its light-bearers. The same psychic forces that once turned prophets into pariahs operate in daily life today. The more radiant the light, the stronger the shadow's resistance. In romantic or close emotional bonds, this Jungian truth plays out with painful precision. INFJs often find themselves loved intensely at first, then subtly resented for being too much, too deep, too perceptive, too calm, too good. Jung would explain this as the partner's anima or animus, the unconscious feminine or masculine aspect within the psyche, being activated. The INFJ embodies the idealized inner opposite that the other person yearns for. Initially, this feels euphoric, even spiritual. But when the reality of integration sets in, when the person must face their own flaws mirrored by the INFJ's steadiness, the illusion breaks. They blame the INFJ for their discomfort, rather than recognizing the process of psychic growth unfolding. Also, Jung would remind the INFJ that their light must never dim in response to resentment. The purpose of such friction is transformation for both parties. When others project their shadows onto the INFJ, it is not a rejection of who the INFJ is, but an opportunity for those individuals to confront themselves. The INFJ's task is not to absorb this darkness, but to transmute it, to remain luminous without losing compassion. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The INFJ's gift is that their presence does exactly that. It makes the darkness conscious, even when that consciousness first appears as resentment. Jung would go even deeper to explain that the tension others feel toward INFJs is not simply personal. It's archetypal. The INFJ carries what he described as the self-archetype in motion, meaning they often radiate a wholeness that others unconsciously recognize as the missing piece of their own psychological puzzle. When someone meets an INFJ, they don't just meet another person. They meet a reflection of what they could be if they transcended fear, healed their wounds, and faced their shadow. That recognition is both magnetic and terrifying. To the unconscious mind, such light feels like judgment, even when none is intended. The ego, desperate to preserve its illusions, begins to resist, to protect its fragile identity. This resistance often manifests as quiet resentment cloaked in admiration. Jung might describe this phenomenon as the psychological tension of opposites. The INFJ embodies an energy that harmonizes the opposites: logic and emotion, compassion and boundary, strength and vulnerability. Most people live polarized within one extreme or the other, constantly at war with themselves. When they encounter someone who has found relative harmony between these inner forces, it forces them to face how internally divided they are. The INFJ becomes the living embodiment of the integration they've avoided. Jung would say that this confrontation with psychic balance ignites envy because it exposes the internal dissonance people have refused to reconcile. Jung would counsel INFJs not to internalize this resentment as rejection, but to understand it as part of their spiritual function. The lightbearer's task, he would say, is not to be universally loved, but to be a catalyst for awakening. The resentment they evoke is proof that their light is doing its work. It is stirring the unconscious. Every glare of envy, every whispered criticism, every cold withdrawal is in truth a symptom of a soul being challenged to grow. The INFJ's grace, then, lies in knowing this truth deeply enough to remain unbothered by the shadows that their very brilliance calls forth.